Welcome to Happy Planet, the Impact Economy podcast where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders in search of profit and planetary health. I am your host, Abigail Carroll. Today we're crossing the pond to the United Kingdom to hear from Harry Wright of Bright Tide how capitalism and sustainability can work hand in hand. Harry's London-based consultancy is helping businesses make climate change and biodiversity a strategic priority with consideration for ESG data, which stands for environmental, social, and governance factors. We'll talk about climate regulations and blue economy opportunities in the United Kingdom. We'll also hone in on investable opportunities surrounding blue carbon, meaning carbon that is stored in coastal or marine ecosystems. Harry also makes an argument for treating nature as a critical part of our economy. He breaks down the ideas of natural capital and ecosystem services. Welcome to the podcast, Harry.
Thank you, Abigail. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Harry, tell me what you do at Bright Tide.
We are a sustainability-based consultancy company based in London. And the work we do really is firstly advising the private sector on the risks around climate change and biodiversity loss, and talking about the new emerging markets in the ocean and green economy. And then we also do a lot of work on the opportunity side. So as well as advising companies on the risks of not taking action on climate and biodiversity loss, we also then run programs where we connect them to investable opportunities or opportunities where they can fit in their supply chain, help them on their net zero journey, and also help them to become this new term nature positive. So it's a bit of a advisory, connecting, and really a bit of strategy, really helping companies figure out what all of this new noise and momentum is around nature and biodiversity.
I'm interested in this also because you're a UK company. I feel like Europe's been way ahead of the United States. How is the UK doing on these issues with respect to Europe?
So UK is doing quite a lot on climate and on biodiversity. We have an initiative called the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is now mandatory for some of the largest companies, public listed companies here in the UK, where companies now have to really disclose what they're doing around climate and also talking about the opportunities as well as risks. There's also a lot of case law which is changing, but perhaps the biggest change for us here in the UK compared to our European friends has been BREXIT and the new environment bill, which is passing through government at the moment, and really disentangling all of the environmental regulations and directives from the EU into the UK now. But the EU has been doing some fascinating work in this field. I think they're really pioneering a huge amount on corporate reporting, sustainability-based reporting. You've got the taxonomy legislation, the new EU restoration law, which is very exciting, where member states have to restore, I think, up to 25% of their country rewilding, restoring ecosystems. It's a very exciting time, and the UK is also doing a lot of work on biodiversity. We had the HM Treasury DAB Bookster review. We have the new Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, where companies will hopefully have to disclose what they're doing on nature in time to come as well. There's a lot of interest. We had COP26 in Glasgow, obviously, this time last year. We've had COP27, we've just had COP15 in Montreal. So companies are really trying to, I think, get up to speed and really think about next year in terms of implementing both climate and biodiversity strategies, and also thinking about disclosure requirements and changing frameworks and reporting. So I think there's a lot to it. I think sustainability teams are very busy at the moment.
Well, I would think that especially in the UK, this would be a very challenging time. You have been through Brexit, 3 prime ministers and 2 heads of state since 2020. Right now you have a new king and hopefully a prime minister that will be around for a little while. Does this feel like a good climate for the climate?
Well, it's been rather unstable. It's probably the politest term of putting it here in the UK. I think for us and the changing geopolitics around the world, where the UK fits in with this sort of climate story, but also as a wider international player on so many different challenging issues, is something which we are still, I think, coming to terms with. But obviously with all those challenges, there are obviously huge opportunities. And I do think that the government and the private sector, and this is where the government sometimes is quite slow to act and may not be doing as much as they can, And when it comes to climate and biodiversity, never has there been such an interest and ambition for companies to take action and to really accelerate solutions to net zero and to become nature positives.
So you're a solicitor, Harry. So you have some legitimate insights into the policy part of this. And you've got the experience working with the companies. So it seems like you're in a pretty good role or situation to be helpful on that policy making.
So the good thing about having a legal background is you're trained to advise clients on certain legal specific issues. So I play that advisory role quite a lot with some of the clients I work with. And that advisory role is really important as well with government, because it's really important that civil society and groups as well are able to push government, remind them of priorities.
For sure. You seem to be very engaged with the parliament. So are you trying to kind of help the government understand what's really at risk here? It seems like you have a voice and you're trying to use it. How do you see your role there?
I really enjoy going to the House of Commons when I have the opportunity. I've been attending quite a few of the net zero all-party parliamentary groups, which are fantastic meetings really, where industry, parliamentarians and civil society can come together and really discuss policy requirements. So for example, I was recently there we were discussing regenerative farming and how new legislation called ELMS, which is the Environmental Land Management Scheme, will pay farmers to restore or rewild part of their land. These are great opportunities to really understand how the political process works. And I've been doing a lot of work on blue carbon at the moment as well, and trying to get the UK government to really see blue carbon as something worth pursuing, worth looking at ecosystems such as seagrass or salt marshes, and seeing them as something valuable and something which is going to help the country on its own net zero journey, but also provide jobs, provide opportunities and restore biodiversity. So it's a really important part of the work I do, and especially with the private sector, our clients there as well, and the startups that we work with. And it's all a case of really joining the dots, I think, between innovation, finance and regulatory frameworks, and pushing everything in the right direction. King
Charles has a history of being an environmentalist. Is his reign going to be a helpful push in the right direction, do you think?
King Charles has been such an inspiration, really, in terms of, he was talking about sustainability decades ago when it wasn't, such a thing. So he's done an awful amount of work. He's also galvanised a lot of the private sector as well through his Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Terra Carta initiative that he's part of. His son, Prince William, as you know, is also a massive, passionate advocate for the environment through the Earthshot Prize and all the work he's doing. So
it sounds like there's some movement on the blue carbon space in the UK. We just saw that Japan has just created a whole policy framework for measuring and verifying blue carbon from seaweed projects. What's the UK doing in that space right now? Or what are they considering?
Yeah, so here in the UK, we have lost, if we take seagrass as one of our blue carbon ecosystems, we've lost 93% of our seagrass since about 1930.
Wow.
On environmental matters, the UK is actually one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. So historically, we've destroyed a lot of our ecosystems, which is part of the reason why I'm so passionate about this. We're trying to figure out the blue carbon work and the ownership of blue carbon and how we can accelerate the market for blue carbon in the UK as well. Part of the problem comes down to sort of three things, I think. First of all is actually mapping out what blue carbon ecosystems we have left, whether that's salt marshes or seagrass or even kelp to an extent. There's still a lot of kelp forests here. Secondly is actually how do we actually measure the carbon if we take a per hectare approach, right. And then obviously monitoring as well. And I think when it comes to monitoring is really important is actually protecting these ecosystems. So seagrass is very susceptible to trawling, to dredging, even to boats when they put their anchor and let their anchor go to the bottom of the ocean. That can really damage seagrass.
And seagrass is important for the whole biodiversity.
Yeah, it's a fantastic ecosystem. It sequesters carbon, it stores the carbon. It is a really important habitat for many different species, including seahorses, which we still have here in the UK. And it harbours biodiversity, so in terms of fisheries, it can really regenerate fish stocks. Part of the thing, Abigail, is that nature. If we leave nature alone, and we can protect and marine protected areas, nature can bounce back, and that's one of the beauties of marine conservation and having things like marine protected areas. is that if we just leave it alone, it will bounce back. So we have these sustainable assets as such, which provide us with so much. And that is the argument, the economic argument I think we have to make, is that these are economic assets which provide us with food, help us sequester carbon, provide us with jobs, and that is why we shouldn't be destroying them.
Talking about nature bouncing back, and it reminded me of some of those videos that we saw of Venice and Paris and these other places during COVID, when we all just went back to our houses. Nature blossomed again, and it, in a very short time frame. So I think that makes me feel optimistic a little bit about what we can do.
Oh, absolutely! Wasn't that extraordinary? I remember, was it in Venice? The dolphins coming back. Dolphins coming back, and it was that just goes to show that if you give nature the breathing space it needs, all of these incredible species, flora and fauna, will come back. A case in example of this is the UK has now rewilded the beaver. The beaver was a traditional species here and went extinct around 400 years ago. But I think about a decade ago, we started bringing back beavers. I'm from Devon, so in the River Otter, they had a pair of beavers, and I think there's over 40 of them now. But what's so amazing about this is that the River Otter, the beavers have brought ecological and environmental benefits back to the river. So the river, there's been a study, I think, by Exeter University, showed that species are coming back because of that one species, the beaver, purifies the water, brings back other species and brings in tourism. There are so many beaver watchers now who want to go and see these incredible species. And this is the nice side of the work we do, is the visual side, is to see ecosystems coming back, and the purpose and the illustration of what you can do.
We had a sort of motto on my oyster farm: nature works well when you let it. Like, the less we interfered with the growth cycle of these oysters, the more beautiful they grew, and the better they grew, and the better adapted they were to their environment. So you've run a number of accelerators. You just finished a blue tech one, and you are now initiating a blue carbon accelerator. Tell me how it's going, and why did you decide to tackle that right now?
It's been so interesting. We launched the applications just a month ago, and we've already had some extraordinary companies and marine projects sign up. So the reason I wanted to do blue carbon is that when I looked at the market, and actually through the experience of working with the ventures on the first program, there is a gigantic demand for blue carbon credits and from the private sector to buy blue carbon credits. The problem is that there's a lack of supply. And there's a number of reasons for that, is that blue carbon ecosystems are probably more complicated, I would say, than more terrestrial natural capital ecosystems like peatland or forests, for example. And the oceans are very misunderstood. If you take the SDGs, the ocean SDG 14, which is life below water, is the least funded of all of the SDGs.
Harry, just for our listeners, you've said SDG. I'd like you to define what that means.
Yeah, so the SDG are the Sustainable Development Goals. So they are 17 global goals, which came from, I think, the Millennium Falcon Goals by the UN. So they're 17 principles. Basically, they are our guiding principles, which cover everything from gender equality to climate action to life below water, which is oceans, to sustainable cities, healthcare. So really all of the social challenges which humans are faced with, the SDGs are our guiding principles that by 2030, we hope to really alleviate and solve all of these different issues. They're a really good framework to look at. They also have outcomes and indicators as well. And as I mentioned, the one which is the least funded and the least supported is tragically the Life Below Water, SDG 14. I find that statistic phenomenal. The ocean covers 71% of all our planet. It sequesters half our carbon. It has a huge role to play in regulating our climate, our temperature, providing fish to over 3 billion people.
Ability to breathe.
Ability to breathe, that's a pretty big one, isn't it? We couldn't breathe without the ocean. Yeah. And then the ocean also contains these incredible ecosystems like seagrass and kelp and salt marshes and mangroves. Mangroves, I think, sequester more carbon than trees do. So the way in which I'm looking at blue carbon is not only just for an economic opportunity, is an opportunity, again, to try and change the paradigm, to try and change the narrative by saying to governments and saying to policymakers and to the private sector, here is the opportunity. We need finance, first of all, to help community-based projects understand the carbon output of their ecosystems, help them set up, the frameworks that they need, the measurement frameworks they need, whether that's on the voluntary carbon market or even more difficult is actually getting verification for a lot of these blue carbon ecosystems. But actually portraying these ecosystems as something valuable, as something worth saving. Because my fear at the moment is that we're losing things at such an accelerated pace that unless we are able to see these things as something valuable and worth saving, we won't have any seagrass ecosystems left in a couple of decades. And that would be a global tragedy, especially for the island communities that depend on these ecosystems to survive. So the aim and design of the programme is to connect both community-based blue carbon projects, whether that's mangroves or seagrasses, really is the main two, with technology ventures. There's some really exciting innovation going on to try and help natural capital projects really understand the measurement, monitoring of blue carbon, bringing them together, creating a growing ecosystem, a level of awareness and understanding, and working with our corporate partners as well to inspire them through the stories that these communities are telling, looking at the additional benefits, not just carbon, but also on biodiversity, jobs creation, gender equality, a lot of these different SDGs. And then providing a program of actual support, whether that's kind of legal support through our legal partner, regulatory support, investment readiness, mentoring, and really growing and accelerating the market that way. But also to really understand in more detail, what are the challenges? Why has this market not been able to grow to its huge potential that it can? So by the end of the program, not only will we be providing valuable support and connecting these entrepreneurs to our private sector partners and networks, I really want to have at the end of this program a real understanding of how we can actually to grow this market in a way which is equitable, which is transparent, which is legitimate, and can build trust and confidence with the private sector, as well as ensuring that any proceeds go directly back to the communities that depend on these ecosystems for their livelihood. At the end of the day, we have to protect the custodians and the indigenous communities that really have the rights to these ecosystems. And that part of my work is really important as well.
We'll be back with more Happy Planet in just a minute. For a blue economy to thrive, people need to use more sustainable products. But which products? And will consumers actually adopt them? Innovators like you are hustling to figure this out. Spark number 9 can tell you if there's demand for your product. Spark markets your product before it's built using online advertising so you launch smarter. Have a big idea? Vet it with Spark before you build. Visit Spark online at www.sparkno9.com or find them on LinkedIn. Maine Venture Fund is a state-sponsored venture fund here in Maine with a mission to support the highest potential Maine-based startup companies by investing early-stage capital. Maine Venture Fund's goal is to accelerate job growth and economic opportunity for the people of Maine. Learn more at mainventurefund.com. Welcome back to Happy Planet. You mentioned the word natural capital. This is a term that I've been hearing a little bit lately. Can you expand on that a little bit and tell listeners what that means and why we care?
So natural capital, it really defines nature and ecosystems that have an economic value. Probably the easy example is you see a lot of tree planting going on. Trees can sequester carbon. That gives the tree a carbon value because they can store or sequester certain tonnage of carbon. You can then generate carbon credits, so companies can pay to offset their emissions against purchasing these carbon credits, and then they can trade those carbon credits. So forests and terrestrial landscapes, the same principle is to peatlands as well. We have a lot of those in Scotland. That is a natural ecosystem that has an economic value. There is also another term which you may have heard is called ecosystem services. So these ecosystems provide us with a lot of services which we have taken for granted really historically and we haven't really valued. So if you think about soil, it's a very valuable ecosystem service. It purifies water. It's very important for crops and for farming. If you take a bumblebee, or pollinators, 90% of all our food and crop types rely on pollinators to pollinate and to really look after our agricultural systems. Mangroves is a really amazing example of an ecosystem service. They provide biodiversity, but also they are our natural insurance and barrier against climate change related risks. So natural capital is really valuing ecosystems for their value to us, really, and putting a value on that, and to try and drive new economic markets to bring money into protecting and preserving these ecosystems so we can continue to rely on them as much as we do.
Very interesting. So tell me a little bit about some of these projects you're seeing. What are some of the technologies or projects that you're really excited about that you think could be game changers?
Yeah, so we've seen some really cool underwater robotic companies, which are really interesting. So underwater drones, which can help us better map out blue carbon ecosystems under the water. There's a lot of exciting companies using things like remote sensing and satellite technology as well to help us map out where these ecosystems are. There are also different ventures which are doing the monitoring part. So we've had a few applications in from unscrewed autonomous marine vehicles, which are run on solar energy or wave energy, and they will sort of sit. Wow. Yeah, really amazing. They'll sort of sit on the surface of the ocean, and using technology like underwater cameras, they can again monitor and pick up data. Data is really important in the ocean, as you know. We have very little data really on ocean ecosystems, and that data is also really important in monitoring carbon over time as well, to avoid things like carbon leakage, double counting as well, to help build trust and confidence with buyers. There's also this amazing business called Whale Seeker, which is a Canadian-run business, one of my favourites. They're doing extraordinary work in using satellite technology, remote sensing, to help shipping companies understand where whales are on their migratory routes, and to help ship captains avoid collisions with whales. And they're also looking at how whales can sequester carbon, and trying to build a market in biodiversity credits, I think it is, for the carbon value that whales have. This follows a lot of work through one of my favourite people in this field, Dr. Ralph Chammy from the IMF, who's done some extraordinary work on the valuation of ecosystems and valuation of the whale itself as well. So yeah, there's some really exciting work going on. The exciting thing is to able to connect these new emerging technologies to the island community groups as well, where these technology companies can really help provide those services that we need to build the understanding, the monitoring, the measuring, and the mapping of the blue carbon ecosystems as well.
Right, because they're the people most immediately hit by our capitalistic behavior, I would say. But I love how we put nature in a capitalistic term. Like, we wrap it up in a market understanding to help people understand the value of it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I feel like it's very easy to look at nature as something else and not part of our, one, it's easy to think of ourselves as not part of nature, but two, it's easy to think of nature as not part of the economy. But it is.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, over half of the global economy is highly or moderately dependent on nature for its future survival. I think the economic term is $43 trillion worth of the global economy relies on nature. So without nature, there won't be a global economy. So it's fundamental to business. This is part of the narrative which, because I've had experience, I've set up a conservation NGO, I love working with researchers, I understand the complexity of research and conservation, but at the same time, I understand the private sector as well. And I think one of our failures has been unable to speak the same language and to build this symbiotic relationship that the economy can continue to grow and we can continue to protect and preserve nature. In fact, we will grow the economy better if we protect natural assets. And that is precisely what we need to do. I would love to say we can protect nature just for its intrinsic value, but since 1970, we've lost 70% of all species on Earth. And at the moment, the future is exceptionally bleak. So this may be one of our last opportunities to really protect the natural world from destruction.
I want to push back a little bit on the carbon credit. I think there's a lot of naysayers out there who think that we're selling carbon credits to the big polluters and that is sort of allowing them to continue to pollute. How do we ensure that we make progress forward to just better treatment in the first place of the planet?
I think a lot of the criticism is actually very justified. There are a lot of actors, I would say, in the carbon credit market who are looking at this as a way of making a quick buck. And we need to push back against that because that will destroy the market. It will destroy the legitimacy of climate finance. There is so much brilliant work that is going into climate finance, into biodiversity finance, which is all about using private sector capital to protect and preserve these ecosystems that we desperately rely upon. So that is the narrative for, I think, moving forward for the markets, is actually building the trust, building the transparency as well. Companies themselves are going through their own journey. And I think the way which law and regulation is also changing and is pushing companies into actually disclosing around, what are they actually doing on climate change? What are they doing on biodiversity? What is their net zero plan? How are they meeting those commitments and those targets which they keep talking about? And are they actually talking about it? Is this just greenwashing or is this authentic? And that is one thing key in the market at the moment, is authentic. We've had so many of these conference of parties, COPs. We've had a lot of talking. We've had a lot of new networks and associations being built. Now is time for action, and it's time for authentic action as well. And companies that are authentic will attract better clients, will attract better staff. They will have better branding. They will position themselves in the market. They will be ready for climate risk, for biodiversity risk. They will be better positioned if they deal with these things now, whereas in 5 years' time, if they're still not doing it, I really think they will become dinosaurs, really.
If they don't, yeah. I mean, I just interviewed somebody from Norway yesterday who's really beating paths down in the green hydrogen space, and he just said all these companies are on board. They're all making hydrogen cars. Like, all the big companies are still going to be the big companies, but they're going to be doing net zero products. So it'll be really, I think the next 10 years are going to be fascinating to see.
Oh, absolutely.
Happens.
I mean, if you look at the UK, for example, we've got legislation in place that from 2030, only electric vehicles will be manufactured. So no more new diesel vehicles. So we have to make the transition. We don't make the transition, we'll be looking at a planet by 2100 that we just won't be able to live upon. And there won't be an economy. This is the point. This is why the scientists are telling us we have to take action today and now, because the consequences are catastrophic. Companies will not be here if we continue to destroy the planet, and the biodiversity ecosystems will collapse across the world. And that is why when I talk to companies about risks, the risks are overwhelmingly huge. Think of COVID on steroids. I mean, this is going to shatter global supply chains, stranded assets, losing customers and investors. Litigation is growing in climate and biodiversity movement. So companies which take these things into account now will be in a much better position than those that don't.
You are such a wonderful advocate for the planet. Where did this come from? What, did you have a moment in your life where you just got the bug?
Well, I've always been passionate about wildlife, and my mother, she's crazy about animals. We used to, when I was growing up, we used to spend a lot of time in nature. When I studied law, I always wanted to actually originally become a marine biologist, but I just sucked at biology. I was just really rubbish at it, and that's really where my legal career started. But after a year doing corporate law, I had enough pretty much straight away, and I wanted to pursue conservation, the environment. I remember having a blog actually when I was a trainee lawyer, and I'm talking about things like the orangutan in Borneo, palm oil and all these things, and no one cared at all in the private sector. And that was only, 6 years ago. Look how much has changed in just that time. But after working as a lawyer for a year, I actually resigned, and I did the craziest, outrageous thing I could probably do as a young lawyer. I moved to the Maldives, and I worked on with an amazing conservation NGO on a remote island for about 4 months, I think it was. But we did a lot of work on coral restoration. It was a turtle rescue centre there, and that really hit home, just the complications that island communities were faced with. Coral reef, the Maldives lost, I think 80% of their reefs were bleached in 2016. So it gives you, when you have those sort of first-hand experiences as well of dealing with an environmental catastrophe, it gives you that impetus to then do whatever you can to try and change the paradigm. And I have been bold and courageous, I think, by leaving my legal career to start a company and to do this. So I will spend my rest of my life doing this.
So where is Bright Tide now? And what's going to make its future even brighter, Harry?
I've been doing this the company's been running, I've been doing it full time for over a year now. And it's extraordinary to see how much impact we've had in just a year. We've been working with 14 different clients. I think we've reached over thousands of employees. We have obviously helped startups through our Blue Economy program. We've got our Blue Carbon program. And next year is a really big year for us. We're growing the team. The focus is going to be on the advisory work we do with clients, but also then connecting them with these incredible solutions and seeing how we can scale up that model as a real conduit, really, for moving forward and accelerating the solutions where we need to go. So there's a bright future ahead to turn the tide on climate and biodiversity loss. Watch this space. Next year is a really big year for us.
Oh, I'm so excited to see. So what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs in the climate space? I mean, you're doing this professionally as you're giving advice to them, but sort of, what's your favorite advice?
I would say if you want to start a company, there's probably never been a better time to do it, especially in the climate space. There is a lot of venture capital, there's a lot of finance, as we both know, actually out there. There are investors really want to invest in cool startups that are climate or biodiversity related. The ambition from companies is there. So, there's a massive opportunity to help companies on their journey, to help measure biodiversity or to revolutionize supply chains. But also, I think just do it. Find someone you can trust as a co-founder. I think that's really important. Try and find mentors or advisors who can help you in setting up a company. Look at accelerator programs, because actually they are brilliant ways to build your network, to gain support and develop your idea, and just go for it. Be bold, be courageous, and help us become part of this movement of using innovation to solve our greatest challenges.
That's beautiful. Thank you for coming, Harry. I love hearing about the startup environment in the United Kingdom and the role BREXIT and a new monarch might play in its blue economy. We will soon be hearing from Urchinomics, which went through one of Harry's accelerators and has since become a major player in the sea urchin and blue carbon worlds. One thing I like about Harry's story is his own personal success story. It's amazing to me how quickly he's built this business and had an impact. To learn more about Harry and Bright Tide, check out the website listed in the show notes. Thank you for listening. Please follow Happy Planet Podcast wherever you listen and leave us a rating and review. It really helps new listeners discover the show. Happy Planet Podcast was reported and hosted by me. I am also the executive producer. The talented Dylan Hoyer is our producer and editor. Composer George Brandel Egloff created our theme music. Learn more about my work and get in touch by visiting happyplanetcapital.com.